debate. We're looking at Senegal, once heralded as a beacon of light for democracy on the African continent, where tension is building ahead of Abdoulaye Wade's bid on Sunday for a third term. Talking about it with us is Doudou Sidibé, head of Wade's campaign here in France from the PDS, so the party, Amadou Gueye of the Senegalese Socialist Party, the former single party, ruling party rather, in Senegal. Mamadou Diouf is the director of the Institute for African Studies at Columbia University. He joins us from New York City. And Douglas Yates of the American Graduate School. Thank you for being with us. Yates, whose latest book is
The Scramble for African Oil.
Okay, which has just been published by
Pluto Press.
Pluto Press, there you go. Let's look at some of your reactions to that upcoming election in Senegal. And there is a slight measure of divided reaction. A lot of people are ruing Wade's run for a third term. El Hadji from Linguère in Senegal says, "Shame, it's shameful for an old man to hang on to power despite numerous deaths due to an illegal bid." That an allusion to the unrest we've seen the past few days. On Twitter, Abdul Tijan Cole saying, "Most presidential candidates in the opposition are not campaigning, but focused on third-term issue. Opposition to Wade is the only thing that unites them." Amadou Gueye, it is a divided opposition. There's this coalition called the M23. They tried to agree on a single name for the election. That didn't happen. Everyone is running on his own.
I was one of those who thinks the one candidate strategy was a failing strategy. It was the dream of Wade to get one candidate and get us entangled in a situation where he'll say, "You are divided just against me. You have nothing to offer." In this case, we have 13 candidates. We will have a second tour to get the president elected.
If there's a second round.
We will have a second round because nobody, Wade polls now at 20%. In the recent unofficial polls, he can't win in the first round. So we at the Socialist Party, we've done our work with the President Ousmane Tanor Dieng. He's done a reboot of the party. He won the primaries in the whole 14 regions of the country. He is the single candidate who won primaries by the militants of his party. And he's done his work in 12.
Right, so that's who you're favoring.
Yeah.
But there are other candidates that are in the fray. We won't go down the list. You think it's going to be a first round win for Wade? He's going to get 51% in the first round.
Yes. Why? Because they are not doing campaign. They're just doing demonstration. And how are you going to win an election by demonstrating? You just ask for the people, the electorate, to vote for you before gaining an election. And this opposition is not going to the election to win, just to demonstrate on the third term mandate.
Right.
Term, yes.
And it's a point that we asked the head of state himself in a joint interview last month with Radio France International. France 24's Mark Perlman sat down with the Senegalese president.
Je pars dans un combat sans rival, pratiquement.
Donc vous pensez être réélu dès le premier tour?
Absolument, sans aucun problème. Ils ne font pas le poids devant moi quand même, franchement.
Mamadou Diouf, do you agree that Abdoulaye Wade's rivals don't measure up?
Well, it's a joke. I think that he's so arrogant that he's even not respecting the people who accepted actually to run with him. I think what is so sad for me as a Senegalese citizen is to see a president who does not even respect his adversary, which show the way in which he also look at organizing the election. But it's quite clear. He has already told us that he will have 53% of the vote. Wade knows, and it's clear that if he goes to a second round, with any of the candidate, he will lose because people will campaign against him. They will come together against him. But this is not the problem today. The problem is, are the election going to go on? It's not about him winning right now. We are in such a situation that the problem is, can we really organize fair and transparent election in this context? The second element, which is important, is about the opposition. Of course, they are divided. But, as an analyst, I don't understand why we have to say that they have to be united. For what reason? They are divided because they don't think the same thing. The problem, unfortunately, is they have, all of them, including, the Socialist Party, sold this illusion to the Senegalese that they were in a position to find one candidate, when it was absolutely clear, for me at least, that they will not go with one candidate.
Let's talk about this issue of means and also of organization. There was huge international outcry when the Constitutional Court invalidated the candidacy of Youssou N'Dour. But I've spoken to Senegalese who are in no way fans of Wade and who say there's an extremely good chance that the the world music icon did not, in fact, get his act together and probably did botch the citizen signatures campaign to get on the ballot. So, the problem of organization is huge, it seems, for the opposition.
No, it's possible for Youssou N'Dour. The other opposition, they are very well organized. I'm sorry. If you look at Macky Sall, if you look at the party, the Socialist Party, if you look at Moustapha Niasse, these are well-organized party. Youssou N'Dour decided very late to run for power. Of course, he was disorganized. Of course, he doesn't have the infrastructure. Of course, he doesn't have the advisors. Of course, he doesn't know how the political system functions. But why was he eliminated was interesting. If all that is true, that he was even not going to be part of any second round. Youssou N'Dour's threat to Wade was not that he was in a position to win or he was well organized. But Youssou N'Dour running is hundreds of media present in Senegal and highlighting what is going to Senegal. So Wade needed to eliminate him. It's just that. It's a simple political decision.
All right. Douglas Yates, the context of an election campaign is an ambivalent one, as described there by Mamadou Diouf. He's posing the question of whether or not the vote can take place this weekend. There's sort of a mixed feeling about whether there should be protests or campaigning.
Right. I mean, a really interesting comment, and I don't mean to sit on the fence, but it is hard for me to declare whether Wade would win in the first round or the second round. But one way or another, I intuitively believe that Wade will remain president of Senegal. One of the scenarios possibly is that the opposition will fail to turn out. There might be last-minute boycotts. There might be continual protests that can only serve, of course, to increase the percentage that the Democratic Party of Senegal would get. The other would be that the opposition turns out, but they splinter their votes because they fail to unite behind a single candidate. And we've seen in many African elections, when you fail to do that, you tend to lose to the incumbent.
But we've seen the counterexample, most notably in Guinea, where one candidate had nearly 50% of the vote in the first round and lost the election.
Guinea's so interesting because of the ethnic dimension in that vote. The anti-Fulani, the anti-Pull vote clearly gathered people around Alpha Condé against his opponent, whereas in Senegal, there rather is an inter-ethnic basis for parties. There's no strong anti-Wolof vote or anti-Malinke vote that could propel that. But it's true, we do have counterexamples. But I do imagine it will be more difficult for Wade to construct a majority if he was against a unified candidate. But on the other hand, their lack of unity, I think, will play out in the second round. And the failure to have a program and the failure to have a common candidate means all that does unite them is they are opposed to Wade.
All right. Well,
but what are your bases saying that these people cannot go together? What are your evidence? I would like to know, where do you find that?
Well,
what are your evidence saying that if you have a second term and you have Macky Sall or Tanor or Nias, the opposition will not vote for them.
Well,
By the way, it's what happened in 2000. In 2000, Wad was not the only candidate, okay? But the most important, the man who came third supported him. The other man who came fourth supported Diouf. That you cannot say what you say except if has a speculation. I'm sorry.
I actually respect your view, and I should frame what I'm saying as speculative. I opened by saying it's very difficult to predict whether he'd be in the first or second round. But I just want to note for our viewers who don't know how these two-round elections work, a two-round election, in the first round, people will tend to vote for their party, the party that most represents them, the one with whom they most identify with. And these don't appear to be ideological in Senegal. There's not really a left or a right in the sense that you'd have in the French system. And so it's very difficult for people to rally ideologically. And therefore, what they have to do is largely rally for personalities. And there, a recent study in the International Political Science Review of 4 African democracies showed that ethnicity is not as important as people claim, but region. And what you have with these different parties is probably representation of very different regional interests. For example, Casamance, which was one example used by the Socialist Party candidate. Regional parties in Casamance have a difficult time siding with the Socialist Party that fought a war against them for decades.
All right, there's the regional issue. There's also the issue of what they call whenever there's an election in Senegal, people look at these religious brotherhoods, whether they lean different ways. Some of them have. The government this Friday saying sorry for firing tear gas into a Dakar mosque loyal to the Tijan Brotherhood. But what Senegal watchers say, what alarms them, is that it appears as though the Big Brotherhood's appeals for calm are largely being ignored. Are the battle lines sort of shifting, Mamadou Diouf, in terms of what makes a Senegalese citizen decide who to vote for as the population becomes more urbanized and with a young population?
Absolutely. It's why sometimes I'm so fascinated by conclusion people are drawing without looking what has happened this more than 20 years. If you go back to 1988, which is a turning point, when we still nobody will ever know who won really between Diouf and Wade, but basically Diouf was proclaimed president. And what is interesting is a process through which Senegalese began fighting to make sure that we will get the right institution for fair election. And what happened in 2000 is two things. One, the Senegalese were able to have the right institution and the right electoral administration. Second, and this is very important, you have had a large discussion within parties, between parties, to make a choice. And we had more than one candidate. Wade was not the candidate of unity. And third, Senegalese have been able at least to convince the head of the Brotherhood to stop siding with one candidate. And this has been the problem. And one of the consequences is that you have today many young clerics, marabouts, I call them les marabouts mondains, who are completely involved in the system, who has destroyed actually the legitimacy of the brotherhoods and have been actually playing a very negative role for them. As a result, you are right, today the Marabout are not able to tell, including not only the Senegalese, but their own disciples, to do what they think they should do.
All right, so it's possibly adding to the uncertainty. Before we go, lots of people focusing on Wade's age. We mentioned it at the outset. Douglas Yates even suggesting he might be older than 85. There's another African leader who's high on people's minds in that score. Robert Mugabe turns 88 this Tuesday. Critics say that it's because of his age that presidential elections in Zimbabwe have been brought forth to this year. His party says he is running. Nobel Literature laureate Wole Soyinka mentioned Mugabe and Wade recently on a trip to South Africa. He said, "I sometimes suggest that maybe the problem with us, with our African leaders, is that coming from societies which rather value rituals, that really what they're seeking is a state funeral with all of the African ritualism that goes with it. Because I do not see why somebody, for instance, like Mugabe, should still attempt to cling to power one day longer. I'm not going to ask you about Robert Mugabe, but I will ask you, Abdoulaye Wade would be 92 at the end of his next term. Isn't that a bit old?
No, Abdoulaye Wade is will be 92, but he's working with young people, you know, like myself. I'm young and I'm heading the campaign here in France. What's the matter? What about the age? It's not important.
The matter is,
no,
it's not a generation gap, it's a century gap.
No.
You have a country where 70% of the country have less than 35 years old. And we have a president who is going to 10 years old. It's not a gap,
listen,
it's a century gap.
All right, but can he run the country at age 92?
He came to power very late, but he did not last long in power. It's very important to say. Abdoulaye Wade is always dynamic. He's in good health, and he feels himself to continue, and he can continue for me. And he's working with young people, and it is what is important.
Mamadou Diouf, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think in addition to what Soyinka said, in the case of Wade, he's competing with Senghor. He wants to reach the Senghor 20 years threshold, probably. And he wants to eliminate Senghor from the history book. But my problem is even not his age. My problem is today, the only issue is the respect of the Constitution. Yeah. That's it. I don't care about what's age today. It's a problem, but I don't care. Today, the Senegalese problem is what the Constitution is saying, and the Constitution should be respected.
All right, and the presidential election taking place this Sunday. I want to thank my guests, Doudou Sidibé, Douglas Yates. I want to thank Amadou Gueye, and for joining us from New York City, Mamadou Diouf, and thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Stay with us because coming up next, it's time for Business, hosted by Tom Burgess Watson.